Yes. Works.
Is it okay?
Yeah. Okay, 2 more minutes. Thank you. Thank you.
Kenapa tak terima?
Do I see Silan in the participants? Not yet. Yes, I disabled the mic and cameras for audience. I will enable them once when at the Q&A session. So we give. Oh yeah, Victor, sorry. I'll make you a presenter. Silan, I see you. Make you a presenter.
Good morning.
Good morning. As people joining.
Good morning, good afternoon. How are you?
Hello. Hi, Victor.
Hi.
Johan. Victor. Okay, people are so on time. Let me see whether I see any speakers. Oh, here I found one. Oops. Shall we start? It's up to you, JP. You decide. We lost our screen. Is it black right now? I see Johan. Priyanti? I did. Okay,
Yes.
now I see it. I see it. Now I see it. Okay, wait, now we can see it.
Perfect.
Yeah, JP, it's all yours.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I hope that yesterday was very interesting for everyone. Let's continue with the topic about sample frames and listening. In this occasion, we have two speakers for this session. The first speaker are from the Malaysia Department of Statistics. The title of the presentation is Toward a Comprehensive Malaysia Population Sampling Frame. The second speaker is Thomas Glaser, and the title of his presentation is Improving Certification for the First Weight Sample of the US Civic in Austria. Then we'll have the space for the Q&A. So the people of Malaysia can start now if they want.
You're muted, Riyati, if you're speaking.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Hi and hello everyone. Again, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Riyanti Sari from Methodology and Research Division, Department of Statistics, Malaysia. So today I would like to share a study case or simulation that was done in order to have a comprehensive population sampling frame and sampling design for household. Next, please. Not move. Okay, so this is the outline of my presentation today. I will cover on 5 items. First, introduction. Second, methodology. Third, results, followed by issues and challenges. And last but not least, way forward. So for information, since 1970, the comprehensive census has been conducted 5 times in Malaysia, offering invaluable insights into our population and housing landscape. However, focusing on the 6th census that was conducted in July 2020 was introduced the Malaysia Integrated Population Census System, or we call it as MyIPCS, which is designed to modernize MyCensus 2020. So one of the main outcome of the Malaysia Census 2020 is Malaysia Statistical Address Register, or we call it as MSAR, and a second Malaysia Statistical Population Register, we call it as MSPR. What is MSAR? So MSAR is actually a database, consists of a comprehensive or master list of household address, whether occupied or not, containing postal address information and geographical location, while MSPR is a comprehensive or master list of individuals with basic socio-demographic and economic characteristics. By maintaining this register, we ensure that our sampling design are well targeted and responsive to the changing dynamics of our population. However, please be informed that the journey towards a fully optimized of MSAR and MSPR are ongoing, and we are in the initial stages of enhancing and improving this database. Okay. So this is the Malaysia current practice. So the frame used for the selection of the sample is primarily based on the household sampling, which is composed of enumeration block or EB. And in Malaysia, enumeration blocks refers as EBs, that is geographically contiguous areas of land with well-defined boundaries. On average, each enumeration block encompasses approximately 80 to 120 living quarters, making manageable units for sampling for sampling purposes. For information, all enumeration blocks are established within legally defined gazetted boundaries, such as within specific administrative district, mukim, or local authorities areas. For sampling design, the complex sample design described involves stratification, clustering, and a multi-stage sampling approach. So the sampling method for household survey was a multi-stage stratified sampling. For example, the Household Income Expenditure 2022 survey was certified according to the state's administrative district, urban and rural. So the total strata being formed were 320 strata, or we can consider is as 320 cells. This is the illustration of complex sampling design for household income survey. The sampling method, as I mentioned earlier, was a multi-stage certified sampling. So the survey was certified according to the state's administrative district and urban or rural area, which is 320 cells. So the sampling involved two stages. First stage sampling is a primary sampling unit, or we call it as PSU, which was the enrichment block, or EB. And second stage sampling is secondary sampling unit, which was selection of living quarters at the selected EBs. The calculation of a household income survey are based on five key factors. First, population. Second, a variable of interest, or VOI, which is mean income in 2019. Third, a precision level, margin of error at 3 or to 10%. Fourth, confidence levels is set at 95%, and then design effect, followed by response rate at 85%. At the moment, the sampling design for household survey and the living quarter selection with the assumption that EB are homogeneous. However, due to the dynamic changes of a population structure, we noticed that some EB are heterogeneous, especially in urban area. So based on the initial development of MSPP, or Malaysia Statistical Population Profile, we try to come out with the simulation or study case focusing on LQ by income group as a substrata instead of at LQ level only. So the simulation was done by leveraging data from three key sources. First, MSA. Second, Malaysia Population and Housing Census 2020. And third, we use administrative tax data from the Inland Revenue Board of Malaysia. Then this is the framework of simulation by leveraging data from multiple sources as mentioned just now. So the population household in Putrajaya for the year 2021, while the sampling frame is living quarters in Putrajaya with household income data. The sampling design is a one-stage stratified random sampling. Variable of interest, or VOI, is household monthly income, and the sample size calculation is at precinct or local authorities area, which is represent at more smaller area. In terms of data cleansing and data matching process, I have no intention of explaining further, but the point is based on two main sources, which are population and housing census, and second source from IRB, Inland Revenue Board data. There are about 69% of record have income information, which is 26,000 LQs out of 38,000 LQs. So after the cleansing and matching process, the average income and relevant statistics such as standard deviation, standard error, and median will be generated for each precinct in Putrajaya. So this information is essential for sample size calculation and provides insight into the income distribution and variability within each precinct. Okay, so we can see that based on the result, the highest average income in wilayah Putrajaya is in precinct 10 with an average income of 15,000, followed by precinct 12 with an average income of 12,000, then precinct 19 with an average income of 7,900. With this simulation, the sample size calculation is performed or represented at the precinct level, allowing for a more granular analysis and reliable of the data. The calculation takes into account several important factors, including a design effect at 1.5%, response rate at 85%, and third, margin of error at 10%, followed by confidence levels at 95%. Then distribution of living quarters is based on income groups that have been recalculated using data from Census 2020 and the Inland Revenue Board of Malaysia. So this recalibration actually to ensure that the sample size calculation aligns with the latest income data and also demographic characteristics. For simulation, we draw 3 times, whereby the absolute percent difference between the point estimate for a weighted sample and the census data is calculated. For each combination of domain, first we calculate the point estimate for the weighted sample. Second, calculate the point estimate for the census data. And then third, we calculate the absolute percent difference, or we can see that P difference. So based on the absolute percent difference, we can see there are quite small, which is a less than 1% for among top 20, middle 40, and also bottom 40. Similarly, for the second simulation, means that we draw the sample for second times. The absolute percent difference are also quite small, which is less than 1% for among top 20 and 40 and also bottom 40. As well as similar for third simulation, the absolute percent difference is also less than 1%. So in conclusion, based on the results, sampling design more representative and analysis more reliable by using a comprehensive population sampling frame, whereby LQs by income group as a substrata for household income survey instead of LQ only. Then in aspect of challenges, we are facing of issues on no unique ID. So in such cases, using addresses as a means of identification can be a practical solution. However, it's crucial to ensure that the address are standardized and harmonized within the existing Malaysia Statistical Address Register. Second challenges is incorrect information of state or city or address. So address inaccuracies or misclassification of state, city or location can pose challenges in data processing, especially when dealing with large data sets. Third challenges in terms of ID review, we are facing incorrect census district number, incorrect EB number, enumeration block number, and also incorrect LQ numbers. Last, we are also facing with the incomplete identification card numbers. Incomplete identification card numbers can be a challenge when dealing with administrative data or records data. So way forward, it is a need to develop a structured population profile in order to have a comprehensive population frame, and a structured population profile would include detailed demographic and socioeconomic information about the population, categorized by various factors like age, gender, income, education, and etc. Second, improve sampling design and sample selection in order to produce a better quality granular data. So with that, thank you very much.
JP, I think you're muted.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It was very interesting, and we will surely have many questions at the end of the session. The next speaker is Thomas Glasser. He graduated in statistics and sociology from the University of Vienna. He's a current member of the Center of Methodology at Statistics Austria. And the title of his presentation is Improving Certification for the First Wave Sample of EU Silk in Austria.
Okay, hello. Thank you for the kind introduction. I hope my slides are also coming up. Howie, is it please possible to share my slides?
Yes, absolutely. Sorry.
Thank you very much.
Zichi, are you sharing or me sharing?
I think it
Oh,
is
no, I must.
better if
Sorry.
you, sorry.
Let me
I
do
was
it.
asking Zichi, so she's doing it. Sorry, Thomas. My colleague
No problem, no
is
problem.
doing that.
No problem at all.
Perfect. Yeah. Great.
That's fine, thank you.
Thank
I hope
you.
everyone can hear me. Apparently, this works.
Yes.
So thank you for the, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. My name, as you've heard, is Thomas Glaser. I'm working at Statistics Austria at the Center for Methodology. And for many years, I have been working at the Directorate of Population Statistics, where one of the surveys I dealt with and I worked on most of the time was the survey EU-SILC. This survey will be the center of my talk and especially stratification for the first wave samples of this survey. So I'm going to make a short introduction of this survey very soon. Another very important point of my talk is going to be our sampling frame that is enriched with a lot of register information. And then I will give you some results on some first results on our application of this new stratification method. So next slide, please. I will, as I've said before, start talking about the survey EU-SILC. EU-SILC in Austria is a survey that is carried out in for many years now, and it is actually a survey that is carried out in the European Union and also in some other states on the European continent, like Switzerland, UK, Iceland, Finland, and so on, and Albania. And EU-SILC is an abbreviation for the EU Statistics on Income and Living Condition. So this survey covers a broad variety of topics on income, poverty, social exclusion, living conditions. And it is also a very important tool for measuring the EU 2030 target on poverty and social exclusion. And this is done by the main indicator of EU-SILC, the risk of poverty or social exclusion rate. This indicator measures the EU 2030 target, which is that 15 million people should be lifted out of at risk of poverty or social exclusion by the year 2030, 5 million of them children. And this indicator is actually composed of three sub parts. The risk of poverty rate is the first part, which is a purely income distributional measure. It's persons that live below 60% of the median equivalized income. So it's a measure of income poverty. Another measure is the severe material and social deprivation, where 7 out of 13 basic needs that cannot be afforded are questioned in the survey. And the third part of this indicator is the low work intensity. I'm elaborating on this because for many years, only the risk of poverty rate was the main indicator, but with the EU 2020 targets and now with the EU 2030 target, the risk of poverty or social exclusion rate is the main indicator of EU-SILC. EU-SILC in Austria is a sample survey of private households, of persons living in private households, and it is carried out with voluntary participation. So inevitably, there is some amount of non-response. And it has been carried out since 2003 in Austria. And the full rotational panel design that is still carried on until this year and will be carried on is a rotating panel design. So this means that each year the cross-sectional sample of your silk consists of 4 rotational subsamples. There's one sample that is in the panel for 4 years, then one for 3 years, one for 2 years, and one freshly selected new subsample. And this new freshly selected subsample is going to be the center of attention for my talk, because I'm going to talk about sampling, first wave sampling, for this part of a new rotation. So this every year we have a new sample for a new rotation that is drawn out of a sampling frame. Now, please, next slide. One feature of that ISWGHS in Austria also has since 2012, based on a national regulation, is that we can actually merge income data from administrative registers to the sample, which is very, very important for income collection. This is carried out by so for surveying income on households, I want to say. This is made possible by pseudonymized key. So based on this national regulation, we can merge different registers from administrative sources together to our sample. And these register data can also be used for imputation and weighting, for example, for marginal distributions in calibration. And also, this register data via this pseudonymized key are not only available on the sample level, but also on the sampling frame level, which I will elaborate a little bit later. But in the next slide, I'm still going to talk about the sample of ISWGHS, the survey. So it's a probability sample drawn from a sampling frame. And the sampling frames we used in the last years were always based on several registers. It's actually one stage stratified probability sample. We have some disproportional allocation too within Austrian provinces. The important thing here in this slide are the stratification criteria. So up until 2015, we have only regional stratification criteria. These are made up of the Austrian provinces, 9 Austrian provinces, which are on NUTS 2 level on the nomenclature of territories. And these are 9 areas. And they were subdivided by interview units, almost 200. And these interview units were only out of practicality for the field work. In 2016 and 17, we started merging income registers to the sampling frame. And we came up with kind of a proxy for the main indicators for income poverty. And we used the first quartile of the household income distribution only from registers, which was available on the sampling frame as a substratification criteria. DB040 here denotes the strata variable that is composed of the regional units. And each regional unit is subdivided by a binary indicator of being part of the first quartile of the household income distribution or the rest. In 2018, we elaborated further, and by then we had also much more information on our sampling frame, and we could actually estimate the main variable of interest, the risk of poverty or social exclusion rate, on the sampling frame. And then we came up with new substratification, and then we only substratified the Austrian provinces by the estimated ROP, leading to 18 different strata. But in order to make sure that also the sample is regionally is regionally dispersed enough, we switched to systematic sampling within the interview units. The expected outcome of the new substratification by ROPI, which is the center of this talk, is that the standard error of the main indicator for ROPI is expected to become smaller. So the estimation to become more efficient if a substratification is carried out with a variable that is very highly correlated with the risk of poverty and social exclusion rate. That means which is very highly correlated with the main survey variable of interest. So now in the next slides, I'm going to talk about the basis of the sampling frame. We call this the rich frame because it holds many different informations. So it is a sampling frame for all person and household service, Statistics Austria, and it consists of 3 main sources. One is the central population register, where information on the place of residence and some sociodemographic information like gender and age and so forth are stored. We have a building and housing register that stores information on the building, on the housing units and regional criteria. And then we have a lot of additional registers holding income and education related and other characteristics. The important thing here is that by creating this sampling frame, this rich frame, there remain no direct identifiers. We use pseudonymization to make sure that no names, no addresses, or no coordinates of addresses remain in the sampling frame. We can also restrict the sampling frame to private households, which is based on an identifier in the central residence register. In the next slide, I'm going to elaborate a little bit on the composition, starting with the previously mentioned central residence register. This register is an administrative register of residents of people living in Austria. The central population register is a pseudonymized version of this. Here again, this pseudonymized key I mentioned at the beginning, the BPK, is used to make a pseudonymized mirror of the central residence register. And here all the information on the place of residence, age, gender, and so forth are held. Also, the building and housing register is a part, is one basis of the sampling frame, which is held by Statistics Austria. And we have a lot of additional administrative registers that all together via pseudonymization are combined to form, in the end, the rich sampling frame that we use. So if you combine all of this, I think it's in the next effect will show that all of these sources are combined in our sampling frame we call the rich frame, because it holds a lot of information. In the next slide, I'm going to show a few characteristics, the main characteristics in this rich sampling frame. So there are a lot of characteristics, of course, of personal level, like age, gender, country of birth, nationality, the highest educational attainment, 4 levels, various income information from the Ministry of Finance, from an administrative register, are here in this sampling frame in a pseudonymized version. So we have employment from pensions and income tax, and also the economic activity status. On household or regional level, we have different regional criteria like Austrian provinces, political districts that are nested within the Austrian provinces, a smaller criterion, community code, an even smaller criterion, several urban-rural typologies like the DIGURBA, the degree of urbanization, number of dwellings in the building, and also the household size are a part here. The rationale for this distinction is that in the rich frame, we have identifiers, pseudonymized identifiers for the person and also for the households based on the household dwelling concept. Thank you. The next slide shows what can be done with this rich frame. On the example of USilk, as I've indicated in the beginning, we can estimate a version of the at risk of poverty or social exclusion rate, the EROPI, based on the frame. It's denoted here with EROPI hat to distinguish it from the indicator that is estimated from the sample. But it's a characteristic that is highly correlated with EROPI because it uses all the characteristics on household and personal level that is in the rich frame, and it is trained on actual outcomes of the USilk survey from previous years. We do this via a machine learning algorithm. So we train a random forest algorithm to estimate EROPI based on the characteristics in the frame. And we use as a training data the USilk sample with sample weights of previous years. So the thing is then, based on these characteristics in the sampling frame, we can assign an estimated probability to be part of this at risk of poverty or social exclusion, this aerobic group, for each person in the frame. We then order these persons by the highest predicted probability to be at risk of poverty or social exclusion. And we then assign all the persons that fall into the percentage share of aerobi that we know into the group of estimated aerobi affected persons. So if the risk of poverty or social exclusion rate from the last available publication and results of EU-SILC, let's say is 18%, then we train this estimation to have a share of 18% also in the frame. So I'm going to conclude my talk now with results of this improved stratification. In the next slide, I will show the standard error of the risk of poverty or social exclusion rate for the years 2018 to 2022. What we see here is, of course, the point estimate in the second column. You see that the rate is getting slightly higher. The standard error estimation here is divided by two columns. So for the standard error estimation, in this case, we use the SAS procedure survey means, where we use the survey weights, the household identifier as a cluster variable, because all people in one private household that is selected are questions for EU-SILC, so we have a cluster effect. And then we distinguish the stratification criteria. The stratification criteria that only uses the Austrian provinces is denoted by NUTS2. The stratification criterion that is actually applied, where a substratification is applied within NUTS2, is called DBO50. So in DBO50, in the second column in the standard error estimates, we see the result of applying this new substratification criterion by the estimated at risk of poverty or social exclusion rate. Then the coefficient of variation is shown to have a comparable measure over time. And what we see is in the first year of applying this new substratification criterion, the expected standard error, or the coefficient of variation, actually is a bit lower than when neglecting this feature of the stratification in the sampling procedure. Each year, it gets slightly higher. This is to be expected because in 2018, only the first wave sample incorporated this new substratification by the expected at risk of poverty or social exclusion rate. And every year up until 21, freshly selected first wave sample entered this cross section of EU-SILC. And by 2021, the cross section consisted of 4 rotational subsamples that all contain a first wave sample that uses the new substratification. It was carried on to 2022, where we see also a slight increase, but now with this rationale, we don't expect much more change, because now we have this current methodology is matured, and we see this slight reduction of the CV that is about 5%. In the next slide, I will only very quickly show you what happens if only the first wave samples are compared. So here, every year, only the first wave, the result of the first wave sample is weighted separately. And we don't see this amelioration each year of the effect of the substratification criteria. It depends from year to year, but the effect tends to be, in most of the years, it tends to be higher if you just focus our attention on the first wave samples. So I want to conclude my talk now with some remarks in the last slide. As you have seen, since this rich sampling frame has so many features, it has a lot of potential for more efficient sampling. For the case of EU-SILC, the new substratification criteria can, to a certain extent, reduce the standard error of aerobi if you just use a substratification criterion without any over or under sampling. We now apply a more sophisticated estimation of the standard error that is more sophisticated, that is that I showed in the comparison here, where a lot of effects on weighting are incorporated too. So we do a recalibrated bootstrap procedure where the effect of the calibration variables are incorporated in the standard error estimation. And these tend to explain so much more than just the stratification, that the reduction effect of the reduced standard error becomes almost negligible. Of course, concluding with an outlook, oversampling by the expected risk of poverty rate may be an option. We actually use oversampling for smaller surveys in Statistics Austria that are based on the rich sampling frame. For example, the survey on the social impacts of crisis is a much smaller survey, had an oversampling for persons with lowest educational attainment. But for EUSILC, we're still a bit hesitant to introduce a sophisticated oversampling, because SILC covers such a broad variety of topics that oversampling has to be handled with care. But we are already looking into this possibility too. Yeah, thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them in the chat. In the last slide, there's also my contact email address, and also acknowledgements to my colleagues at the Center for Methodology, Alexander Kovarik and Johannes Kussenbauer, who are responsible for the estimation of Europe and for maintaining the sampling frame. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Thomas. Very interesting and has a lot of value information. We have some questions. The first one question is for Malaysia. The first one is, what is the relationship between the LQS and households? And then if can you explain more about the parameter estimate?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moderator. So for the first question, the answer is based on my presentation. We use first stage sampling is PSU, which is we call a primary sampling unit. And PSU refer to inertial block EB, while the secondary sampling unit SSU refers to the living quarters or LQ. So in this simulation, the relationship between LQs and household, at the moment, our SSU is equal to LQs, whereby this LQ was chosen as a proxy to the household, since we don't have a comprehensive list of household information. But based on simulation by using population and housing census and inland revenue data, we can have income group for each LQ. So that's why in this simulation, it is important to have income group for each LQ, which is income group refers to the household income. So based on the simulation, when we use income group LQs by income group as a substrata, it is more accurate in order to have the estimation for each LQs. So that's why it is important between LQs and also income group. Okay. So and then for the second question, based on the slide, parameter estimate is actually derived from population census data and also inland revenue board data. So our intention when we draw sample and the weighted estimation should be equal or close with the parameter estimate, which is we can see at the table the difference between weighted estimated sample and also parameter estimates are quite close which is less than 1%. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your answer. And we have another question here for Thomas. What are the different methods for calculating a point estimator? Sorry. When you have more one variable of focus, for example, poverty and social exclusion in your case.
So for the first question, that is the sampling framework here concerning also non-response. Well, what we actually do is we follow, for the weighting of EUSILK, we follow the methodological guidelines of Eurostat. And this is very elaborated also on non-response. So after the design weighting step for the first wave sample, we do adjustment on non-response. We have logistic regression models to model the event of response. Actually now for the first wave samples, because we found out that modeling the event of the first contact works much better than modeling the event of first contact and response together. We only model the event of the contact with a logistic regression model, then use a weight adjustment factor to this sample weight. And then in the third step, we do a calibration on non-marginal distributions. And these marginal distributions contain also features from the frame actually and from other surveys. So there are sociodemographic features like age, gender, nationality, but also, and this is very important, one of the main features of the sampling frame, that is the economic status, and this is very highly correlated with the risk of poverty or social exclusion rate. So based on this sampling framework for the first wave, we also did simulations some years ago where it turned out that the calibration is of course the version with the lowest mean squared error in terms of possible biases. I hope I did answer this question. So non-response is not considered as completely at random now. Also in the follow-up waves, we use a non-response adjustment factor. In the follow-up waves, the non-responsive adjustment factor for attrition also uses logistic regression models, and then we have much more information, namely of the previous waves. And then the models work much better. We have the adjustment factor also for the follow-up waves, and for the entire gross section, we have a final calibration step 2 on marginal distributions. In the results you saw, this final calibration for the household weights was used for the estimation. In the slide with only the first wave samples, we only used the survey weight that is the result of the design weighting, the non-contact weighting, and the calibration weighting in the first wave sample. I hope I answered this question.
Yes, I think you do. We have another question. I don't know if for Malaysia, for you, Thomas. They want to understand one thing. Did they select the sample according to the households or individuals? And
Okay,
Cillian have a question too. Sorry.
Okay, so there's also another question. Before I will answer the question with the sample selection. Well, it's a sample of private households. In the first wave, we select private households in the sampling frame, but all persons are in this household that live there are surveyed. In the follow-up waves, we follow up the person. So actually, in the first wave, it's a sample of private households. Hello? I hope I... Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I hope I answered the question about the sample selection. So the sampling units are, in the first wave sample are households, but in the follow-up waves, they're persons. And the risk of poverty or social exclusion rate is an indicator that is calculated on person level.
Perfect. We have another question from Anna. Sorry, Celine. Sorry.
Sure, I'll sneak in. I see another question came in the meantime. I had a question actually for both of the speakers. When you move towards having these sorts of rich frames, or having a frame where you've got both the geographic components and then components about individuals, as both of you were talking about, I was wondering if you could say more about your experience where some of that information is missing. Is that something that has been a challenge, and if so, how do you deal with missing information on your frame, or information that's just out of date and likely to change? I was wondering if you guys could speak to that.
Shall I begin? I can also answer it as a second. Okay. So yes, thank you for this question. Of course, the pseudonymized identifiers cannot be found for every person. In the residence register, it's the matching is actually the creating of this with a hash function is actually more tricky if their names are very unusual and or other issues, very register specific issues. There's a problem. It's also a bit of a problem on the sample level. I said that for EOSILK we use income information for results. Then we use obviously we use imputation with other more available characteristics. On the sample level, the procedure I showed for 2016 and 17, we had this income based only on registers, was a bit poor because only income parts that were available were there and that could be matched. We switched in 2018, and this is the answer for me how to deal with this if you use it for like a sub-stratification criteria to estimate some feature in the sampling frame for every person with some method, some regression or some machine learning, which we did from 2018 onwards. So to have this feature for every element, for every person in every household in the sample.
Sorry, I'm just going to follow up. And do you know how accurate that model that you use is? Have you seen do people tend to stay pretty close to the strata in which you're classifying them for income, or do they tend to stay there sort of half the time, but then is there a lot of movement? I know that's very poorly phrased, as it's not very specifically phrased.
Well, yeah, of course, due to many issues based on the fact that the people that we model in the frame is like the register reality, not the people that are actually living in the households, and other things. We have a high accuracy in terms of the training of the model. But if you compare like one result of the risk of poverty rate with the one that is estimated in the frame, I think the correlation is something close to 0.55, 0.6. So it's not very high, but it's better than nothing.
But it's definitely high enough to be useful. It yeah, sort of matches
yes.
the type of experience that we've been having as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. It would be interesting to hear more on another opportunity, maybe.
And we have a last question. I don't know. I just want to inquire if there are set limits for CVs to determine whether the estimate are of quality and can be published. More so for subnational domains.
Yeah. So I think is this question for me or for?
I don't know. Yes. I think it's from Malaysia people, maybe. I don't know.
Malaysia. Okay, for the last question, for Malaysia, at the national level, we actually allow the CV or RSE at 5% or less than 10%. However, at district level, we allow at least less than 25% of a CV or RSE. More than that, actually, we have to interpret with cautious. If more than 50%, so actually, the data is not liable to Okay, can you hear my answer just now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
All right, thank you.
I think this the question on the CV limit is also for me. Yes, we have a limit for the standard area actually that for the risk of poverty or social exclusion rate that is coming into effect in these years, and this is also provided by Eurostat. And one of the things that came out of this is that we now try to incorporate more parts of the survey process, also the calibration, into the calculation of the standard error in order to meet this limit, to have a more precise estimate, because in previous years we only had like the design effect on the risk of poverty rate as a on household level as a limit. Now we have the limit on personal level, which requires a more sophisticated estimation, more precise estimation, because on personal level, for the case of U-Silk, you carry with you for the standard error the whole cluster effect on a household level, since U-Silk is a household survey, and almost every person in one household has the same at risk of poverty or social exclusion. Only special cases it doesn't exist. So yes, we well, the advice that I can give you, if you have limits, what we do now is we put more effort into the weighting, the calibration step, to achieve less dispersed G weights, so weights to adjust the base weights, that the weights don't get dispersed too much, and also use a standard error estimation that takes with the recalibrated bootstrap to take every step of the survey process into account. One of the last thing I said in my presentation, another possibility, of course, is to do some elaborate oversampling. We could also do a very strong oversampling on the substratification level for the risk of poverty or social exclusion rate. But this is a bit delicate if you start with your sample and produce a highly skewed, a highly, how to say, biased sample with one criterion that, of course, you can counteract with design effects, with design weighting. But from my point of view, it's best to start at the end of the survey process with the weighting and the standard error estimations. You have strict limits to meet, and only if this doesn't work, move to change your sampling strategy, because everything you have in the sample will stay there forever in the data.
Thank you very much for both. We have a lot of questions in this session. That's a good sign of the quality of the presentation. Now we are going to take a 10-minute break, and then we come back with the next topic, sampling rare and hard to reach population. And the rest of the question you can put in the chat, and maybe we send to you for the answer.
So with a 10-minute break, do we reconvene at 10:05?
Okay.
New York time?
Perfect.
Welcome back. I think that it's time to start the last session. So I see that our speaker is coming up, though I see somewhat of a gray screen at the moment. So our first speaker for this session is Johan Santiago Ruiz, who's a teaching and research associate at the Institute for Digital Ecosystems in Vienna. He's collaborated with the DataPop Alliance as a project officer and has obtained his MSc from the Toulouse School of Economics. So let me go to the slides that I can share.
Okay,
And
I don't know if
we
you're
will see if we
hearing me.
can. We can hear you.
Okay, just give me 1 second. I'm gonna try to connect again to see whether my camera works. And then I
Sure,
will be just back.
sure, no problem. I'll get the presentation up during the meantime. Ah, perfect.
Hello. Now it seems to work.
Very good. Well, I'll leave it to you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that introduction. Also to the Intersecretariat of Household Surveys. Wait a minute. Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. There is always technical issues. All right, so first of all, thank you very much for this invitation. I'm very glad to be able to share with you some of the projects that I have been working on with the Pop Alliance. This is a foundation. We are based in New York, but also we work mostly in Africa and South America. Today, the idea is to share with you 2 experimental cases in which we used experimental statistics. I want to call them that way. One in IT, one case in IT in which we use responded drive sampling, and another study case in Morocco. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so that's just to show like a little bit of an overview of all the projects that we have done. We work mainly in digital maturity and also using different data tools to build the statistics. Next slide, please. So that's a little bit about me. Well, okay, so there we go. So for the first study case, actually, we were commanded by UNICEF to do a survey in Port-au-Prince, which is the capital city of Haiti. The targeted population were youth between 14 and 25 years old. So I think some of you might be aware of, but the security situation in Haiti is very dire, very serious. It is almost impossible to send a team or to build a team there to collect data on the field. So we needed to come up with a solution. So the solution was to do a responded drive sampling survey. We can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so what I found that it was interesting in sharing with you today is that actually responded drive sampling is a framework that was built over time. It was based in some non-probabilistic sample methods such as snowballing sampling. But over time, thanks to the works of some statisticians, they were able to create like a mathematical framework and some conditions under which the responded driving sampling method could yield like unbiased estimators. If we keep going to the next slide. Okay, there we go. That's okay. Okay, so respondent driving sampling method is a method in which we ask, we first need to collect data information and contact information for a reduced amount of people. In this case, we were targeting youth and children who were victims of sexual, psychological, and physical violence. So it's a very hard to reach population, not only because such victims are not always willing to say out loud that they are actually victims, but also because of the context of violence that was taking place in Haiti. So thanks to the help of some NGOs who are present in Haiti, in Port-au-Prince, we were able to grab like at least 30 contacts of people, children and youth victims of violence, and we actually could build like a list of people that were used in the first wave to start the non-responding driving sampling. Next slide. So responding driving sampling, as I said, was built in the first time. There was not like a theoretical framework for such a methodology, but over time, thanks to the works of Hackathon, namely, it was able to the RDS framework become more solid. So thanks to Markov chains, thanks to also to some graph theory probability framework, now we know more or less what are the conditions under which, if we carry out the respondent driving sampling, we can find that some estimators may be unbiased and convergent. Next slide. So to go very quickly about like some of the assumptions, we need to make the survey in such a network that is connected, in the sense that all the people within the community that we are aiming to target need to know each other, at least by knowing another person. So you can see it here graphically. If I answer or if I carry out the survey to people A, I might be able to reach also person B at some point if I keep doing the survey along the graph. Next slide. But also we need to make sure that there is very low homophilia in the sense that if we start doing the survey for women, or like if the first person who was interviewed is a woman, we need to make sure that at some point in the recruitment chain of that person, we are gonna also be able to reach men. That enables that we are not gonna find out ourselves in a sample that is like that only represents like a part of the population, either male or female, to give an example, but it can also apply for different income categories or for also age or those type of variables. Next slide. But there is of course also some additional assumptions, such that the fact that when the recruitment chain works, when someone recommends someone else to the survey, that person needs to do that randomly, which it might be not always the case. And that's what we mean by no differentiated recruitment. That means that if men can recruit women as much as male can recruit women, or women can recruit men, and so on and so forth. And also something that is very important is that individuals are able to measure the size of the network. So that means that if I ask someone how many people, in the case of the survey that we did in IT, how many people do you know that are victims of violence, either psychological, physical, or sexual violence, they might know more or less how many people are. So that means that they know the network size. And this is important because actually in respondent driving sampling surveys, this information is used to weight the results at the end. So next slide, sorry. Okay, so respondent driving sampling surveys, it's not something new. It's something that has been used a lot during the last 10 years to reach people who has HIV or people who are homosexual in countries where sexual orientation might be illegal, or this type of population that is it's very hard to reach. So what was the new thing that we incorporated in the survey that we did in IT? It was that we actually carry out the survey through WhatsApp. So that means that we identified the set of 6 people that were part of the population of a study, and then we sent the survey through WhatsApp, and then in that way we made sure that we could reach more and more population. So that was actually a way that we could try to overcome the fact that we cannot send a team there. So how can we actually make sure that people share the survey within each other? So we decided to use such a method. The survey lasted or last like between 35 minutes, and it got like around like 20 questions. Next slide. So what was very encouraging, it was that we actually found some convergence, in the sense that when we look here, for instance, at what was the rate of physical violence in Port-au-Prince for the population, we see that overall, when we advance on the chain of recruitment, this rate tends to stabilize around 50%. Same for the victims of psychological violence, it seems to stabilize around 0.25%. So we found that this kind of surveys can actually help to overcome those issues when there is like these two problem settings. First of all, it is a hard to reach population, and second, you cannot send a team on the place because it might be violent or because geographical constraints. So we found out that actually there is convergence, and that using WhatsApp or their Facebook or those social networks can also help to improve the response rate for this type of service. Next slide. And then to conclude this first study case, I wanted to quote Don Hackathon. So if a sampling method is modeled in sufficient detail, then a statistical theory can be constructed from which unbiased indicators and estimates of their precision can be derived. So that is to say that even when in the first place we didn't have like a sampling framework that we could apply to this problem specifically, the fact that the community in general experiment with the statistics can actually help us to advance and hopefully create like a more solid and robust statistics, even if at the beginning they are experimental. Which opens the second study case. If we go to the next slide. Just first to conclude, there might be some problems when doing respondent resamplings over social networks, as we did. And it is that it's hard to overcome the fact that you are going to end up having clusters. This is the recruitment chain for the survey in IT. And as we can see, there is a problem of homophily, in the sense that if you look at the bottom, the chain that is on the middle, for instance, it started with someone who actually had came from the community of Dalmas, and actually that person only recruited people who is between the community of Dalmas. That means that one of the assumptions of the respondent sample survey is not met, namely the fact that people recruited randomly. Since or hence some of the results that we actually are concluded from the survey might be partially biased, but still, this is the only way actually that you can do a survey in IT. We evaluated all the possibilities, and I think that one of the things that I want to maybe put forward in this presentation is that experimental statistics might be not as robust as we want, but in some cases they might be just the only alternative. Next slide. Okay, so the next study case is a study that we are doing currently with the Ministry of Finances in Morocco. And actually, the idea was to try to fill up the gap on when it comes to the statistics indicators for the Sustainable Development Goals. As you may know, there are so many that some countries may have difficulties when it comes to allocating resources to compute those indicators. And in this case, we try to come out with an alternative methodology that might be cheap in comparison to the standard surveys. And the idea is actually to calculate what is the rate of people who have ICT skills in Morocco. And the ICT skills, as they are measured by the United Nations methodology, it is a set of questions in which a person is asked whether, for instance, they know how to copy or to move a file or folder, and so on and so forth. So we try to come out with a new methodology, of course, experimental. We can go to the next slide. And actually, the idea was to use the fact that a big share of the Moroccan population is also within the Facebook social network. So it might be able that we might be able somehow, if we manage to reach those people that are between the Facebook platform, to create an estimator for that indicator. So it's not something new. It has been done previously to target people who smoke or to conduct studies on cancer awareness. The difference here is that we wanted to build a methodology that might be as robust as for it to be able to become a official statistic. Next slide. So why we use the platform? First of all, because it has a lot of users, namely in Morocco, but overall, on the world, it has more than 2.85 billion users. More than 98% of users have access to it from their smartphones. That means that it's very easy for them to reply to the survey. It might take just like a couple of minutes, and they can do it like everywhere. Next slide. Okay, so there are mainly two hypotheses that we knew in advance that this methodology will not be able to, that do not hold in our sampling framework. The first hypothesis is that all the population units have a conditional probability greater than 0 of being part of the sample. We know that this is not true because simply not all the Moroccan population is part of Facebook. There might be some demographic variables actually that can explain why someone is not part of the network. So we know that in advance we are not targeting the whole population, but still it could give us an idea about what the rate of TAC skills are in the country. And the second is that the choice of sampling plan is independent of the random variable in question, which in our concrete case is not true. Because we are trying to measure how much or how much or what are the skills that someone has to deal with computers, with the smartphones. And if we do so by using Facebook, then there might be a correlation, because if you are able to use Facebook, then that might imply as well that you may have like some TAC skills as well. So hypothesis A2 do not hold. Next slide. And this is also to give an idea about what are the difference between the demographic distribution of the Facebook users and of users in general, but in this case of Moroccan users. And as we can see, the first thing there is that comes very strikingly is that as soon as you start using Facebook population, you might tend to overrepresent some types of populations, namely people who is more youth. As we can see, for instance, in the Facebook platform, there were only 3% of people who were older than 65 years old, in comparison to 8% in Morocco. That means that if one does a Facebook survey, people who is aged more than 65 years old, If we do it randomly, they will be underrepresented on the sample. Next slide. So we try to come out with a methodology to actually try to prevent this kind of bias. And actually we implemented a stratification in which we identified a subpopulation that might be more hard to reach. This subpopulation is the people who lives in rural areas, who is more than 60 years old. We know that this type of population, if we do not include it on the Facebook, on the sampling framework from the beginning, then the results, whatever we have, it's going to be like underrepresented. So we try to make sure that at least we could include that part of the population in such a way that it corresponds to the demographic variables that were estimated by the Institute of Statistics in Morocco. So we also might know, if we do that way, the certification, that for some subgroups, our estimations might be less unbiased than for others. And the idea was also to make sure that we have a representative sample. Next slide. So we actually use this formula, the formula for sampling for random sampling, which is not appropriate because we know in advance that our sample is not random, but still we want to keep as much as possible with a methodology that is as close as possible from a random sample. Next slide. Okay, something that is very useful as well is that there are several tools that are open source that can allow you to go to Facebook and to understand what are the demographic variables. I just put one of them here, by Social Watcher. All these are like open source. Next slide. And I will be just concluded in 2 minutes. So this is actually the data that we got from Facebook using that library. As you can see, well, the population that is between 18 and 59 years old is much more greater than the population in Morocco. That is because the Facebook users tend to be younger. Next slide. Okay, so the idea then was to match which information we have from official statistics, which information we can have from Facebook, and to try to mix them in such a way that we can weigh the results at the end to have results that are less biased. Next slide. Okay, and here then we are presenting the results. I am presenting the results. The first graph on the top is the percentage of people who is able to copy and paste an image on a computer or on a smartphone. As you can see, the percentages are very, very high in comparison to other surveys. For instance, the one that was done, the last survey that was done was in 2015, and that percentage was about 30%. So we know that these results may be very biased, but at least they can give us a threshold, in the sense that since we are surveying a population that has on average a TAC skills that are greater than the population, if we do a survey over that subgroup, then we know that we are having at the most what is the percentage of people who has like that skill. So that means that experimental statistics, although they lack accuracy, they can actually help us to have like a other type of information. For instance, comparing between subgroups, between women and men, or between rural and urban, because our hypothesis is that if we are like the difference between subgroups still hold whether you do the Facebook survey or whether you do like a normal survey. This of course we need still to do further research to verify such hypothesis. But something that is interesting also is that the results are congruent, in the sense that if you see at the graph that is on the bottom, then we are measuring a skill that is much more harder. That is whether people is able to use a language to program, to code. and then we see that the percentage just drops. So that means that experimental statistics actually give us the overall view of how things are going, although they lack accuracy. Next slide, please. Okay, then just like a couple ideas to conclude. I think that these kind of exercises are useful in the sense that I took this analogy, maybe it's not appropriate, but well, like when someone is in the bed with an illness and a laboratory offers a quick but not confirmed solution. So what is better, like try to test and have what we can get, or try to come up with a solution that might take several years, or that might imply like spending a lot of money. So that's the case for experimental statistics. They can give us like a very cheap and quick solution, but still they need to be improved with other additional sources. So
I'm going to ask you to wrap up the presentation just to make sure we have time for everybody.
Definitely. So that's basically it. Thank you very much for your attention. Yeah, definitely. If you have any questions or if you want to know more further, please just grab an email, or you can ask questions here as well. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much. I'm going to ask, like in the previous sessions, that we keep questions until the end. And so I will head over to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Victor Boateng. He advises the government in Ghana on national statistical systems, supervises collection, compilation, analysis, many steps. And so I'm very glad that we'll be hearing about your experience. Now let me go to your slides and share them.
Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you find yourself. I hope I can be heard. Can you please hear me?
We can hear you, and you can go ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So my presentation is looking at effective approach to improve sampling efficiency and coverage, how to reach areas. Next. Next slide. So presentation, I'm looking at the sampling methods that we have available, approaches in selecting sampling methods, how we are targeting. Can you go back, please?
Is this a slide that you would like to be on?
No, please, the outline.
I see the outline, I think.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
So we look at also the challenges that we face as National Statistical Office and how we overcome them through the recommendation, then finally conclusion. Next. So with the sampling methods, we have the simple sampling, random sampling available, stratified random sampling, which statistical survey normally use and in our censuses and in our surveys and other CATI and then other data collection methods. We also have the systematic random, cluster sampling, and multi-stage sampling. And in all this, stratified random sampling is what features most in our surveys, such as the GLSS, the DHS, and other surveys that the National Statistical Office run. Next. In approaches in the sampling, selecting methods, during the GLSS round 7 exercise, two-stage sampling, stratified sampling was used. And in this, Ghana is demarcated in 18 administrative regions, 272 statistical districts, and so many localities with about 54,000 enumeration areas. So for us to reach how individuals who are marginalized or how to reach areas, enumeration areas are selected to form the primary sampling units. Then with this, so under the 16 administrative regions, we use the probability proportion to population size estimate to also help to identify the regions that we have, and within the regions, there are districts. For us to have a national representative data, so that data users and policy makers, researchers, and academia can use, we always ensure that these steps are followed through so that we can get most of our data across the national platform. So list of the EAs which the sample size are drawn are from the census sampling frame. So census becomes the mother sampling frame for all surveys that we conduct in the country. And based on that, all the other surveys, as I made mention, GLSS, DHS, are conducted. So 2010 sampling frame was used for the 2014 DHS, 2016-17 GLSS, and other surveys that was run by Ghana Statistical Service or other ministries that contracted GSS to conduct. Next slide. For EAs, which as I made mention, is having about 54,000 at the national level, is made up of urban rural localities. And Ghana has most of our localities in rural area, although urban is more than that of the rural, but in terms of population, residents, we ensure that for us to reach individuals, no matter how hard it is for us to reach them, there's a need for us to ensure that we demarcate the land or the geographical areas into smaller sizes that each enumerator or interviewer can have access to. So in the enumeration area that are used for surveys, we ensure that we make a population that is 750 plus or minus 150 to ensure that one enumerator can canvass that enumeration area, which spans through 14 days during the census period for the listing exercise. So after the listing, then there's a need for the interviewer to follow up with an interview. So through this exercise, there's a need for us to ensure how best we can have accurate details of residents in the country to ensure that no matter how hard it is to reach them, based on the demarcation that has been done, we can have access to their locality, their place of residence, for them to be counted. Next. So this is an example of comprehensive sampling between the 6th and the 7th round of the GLSS that were used. So with the number of PSU selected, we always look at the urban area proportion in the selection. Then when it comes to the number of households that are selected, we also look at the urban, rural, simply because that's how best we can locate individuals within the selected EAs that falls within the sampling frame for the particular survey. So in this, no matter where an individual finds him or herself, an interviewer or enumerator should be able to locate this individual. These are the strategies that are put in place to ensure that how to reach areas are always captured and always have detailed information about. If during the listing exercise, we don't have quality and more of a total coverage in terms of the EAs, definitely some of the residents will be missing out. But for us to have a total coverage, we ensure that EAs have more, or EAs covers all the localities, all the geographical areas in a particular area: urban, rural, region, districts, and locality. Next. So how are we targeting how to reach areas? One, our EA maps are divided into 3 types. We have type 1 EA, that's where the entire locality forms 1 EA. Mostly this type of EAs are rural settings, and it's assigned to 1 enumerator. And it makes it easier for this enumerator to have details address of all residents in this particular enumeration area. So with the snowball effect coming in, there's a need where if a enumerator gets to one particular household thinking that he has completed, a householder can inform the interviewer enumerator, please, there's one structure behind me. Although on the map, you see one locality forming an EA, like how it has been shown on the screen marked red, a householder will alert an interviewer or enumerator that, please, there's a structure behind me. When you get to that new identified structure, that individual also tell the enumerator there's another person behind me. No matter how the circumstances, either is through rivers, streams, or lakes that separate these structures, which makes it hard to reach, enumerators are provided with logistics like life jackets, guide, to ensure that they reach each household within their enumeration area. Next. The next slide talks about type 2 enumeration area. And with this type 2, it's mostly in an urban area where you have so many EAs forming one locality. And because it's an urban area, one person cannot comb around the whole town based on the population, as I stated. So it's been divided into smaller geographical units. And this makes it easier for enumerators to list all households within this enumeration area. So having multiple EAs forming one locality because it's an urban area with more population and more structures, which makes it difficult. But with the smaller demarcation, it makes it easier for this enumerator. The type 3 EA is where you have more localities or areas forming one enumeration area. And this one is a typical rural setting. And this one always happens in a forest area. Ghana has a coastal zone, forest zone, and a savanna zone. So for the savanna and the forest zone, the population are especially more of spread across with a large land size. But due to total coverage in mind, there's a need for us to bring all these localities together to form one EA. And it's so sometimes difficult for enumerators to assess some of the localities due to one, bad road network, two, the distance in between one locality to the other, then third, rivers, lake, where life jackets, as I said previously, given to enumerators to be on a lake for sometimes 1 hour to reach another locality, which makes the work so difficult. But at the end of the day, because we need detailed address and also information, statistical information from households, there's a need for us to ensure that we reach out to them. And these are the 8 strategies that we have put in place to ensure that how to reach area population can be targeted and also enumerated during listing. And it makes our sampling frame from censuses so rich that when even listing exercise during service to validate the sampling frame from the census, you see that yes, accurate work is being done. Next slide. So with a few challenges that are associated with how to reach areas, there are a lot. 5 that comes to mind is the cover area, which includes the conflict or difficult areas to assess. If there's fight currently, there's a tribal conflicts in the northern part of Ghana, making it difficult for listing exercise. In this case, it's a great concern, and there's a need for us to always work with the Security and National Disaster Management Organization to ensure that field officers are protected. Then other one is the respondent fatigue, where you have each households always visited anytime there's a survey, where if you can have a multiple indicator cluster survey going on, demographic and health survey going on, and Ghana Living Standard survey going on, you find during the sampling exercise technique application, you can have 1 or 2 respondents being selected for all these multiple surveys, and it creates a challenge for field officers. Contact details is very key. If we don't do thorough or total coverage for doing listing in the census, it gives a great gap when you want to do the computer-assisted telephone interview or the computer-assisted web interview survey, because you need the detailed addresses of these individuals to conduct this exercise. And if you fail as an institution to do a thorough listing exercise to assess the details of households, how do you go about the CATI or the CAWI service? Ghana, due to the processes that were put in place in 2020, 2021, 2022, we're able to carry out the CATI exercise, which helped because we have a detailed sampling frame from the Ghana Living Standard Survey. And the 2021, we're able to pair the GLSS sampling frame with the 2021 population housing census sampling frame to ensure that we have a same panel being rolled out for 2 years. So same respondents have interviewed over and over to measure the impact of COVID-19 on jobs and households. Then last but not the least is reaching the marginalized population, where individuals who have been discriminated, then there's due to social, political, or economic reasons, there's a need for us to ensure that we can reach out to these individuals. It makes it difficult, but it's an area that, with the strategy put in place by Ghana Statistical Service, we're able to do. Not only Ghana Statistical Service, we have other stakeholders who support in this exercise in terms of logistics and security. Next. So a few recommendations among the many that I have is the detailed physical and personal addresses need to be collected during listing stage. More attention should be on the capturing on the detailed address, especially during training. If focus or attention is not being put on the capturing of detailed address during training, sometimes officers just write anything knowing that you will not use the address for further works. So there's a need for us to let them know that details address that will be collected during listing can be used for CATI and CAWI, and that's where the need arises. Committed staffs, field officers are needed, not because of the incentive that they get, but their actual knowledge that they gain and also their input into national development is key. If they are not committed, they don't know why they should pick detailed address, it affects subsequent surveys that we will do using the listing documents. Also, achieving total coverage with the support of well-demarcated area enumeration area maps is very key, especially in urban areas and forest zone. That's why we talk about the type 2 and type 3. Involvement of local authorities such as assemblymen and women unit committee members, community-based organization during listing stage is key, because with our local settings in Ghana, every district assembly as I said, we have the national, we have the region and the district. And within the district, they have assemblymen and women who are being voted for a unit committee. They know there are members within the community that they supervise. And there are also community-based organizations that helps in the social services to support the government. So they know every household within the community. So if during the listening stage, we involve these individuals or organizations, they really help us to achieve a total coverage doing listing, and which helps us to have a very reliable sampling frame during subsequent service. Next. So in conclusion, development of standardized sampling frame for member countries is key, and a country can localize the standardized frame to suit its needs at a particular point in time. A detailed address and contact of households needs to be emphasized to support CATI and CARI, because with CATI, if your detailed address is flawed, it means your sampling that you are going to use for the CATI or CARI is going to be affected at the grand scale, which it will affect your results and also your generalization for national and policy relevance. A secure database for sensor listing for servers as a sampling frame for subsequent surveys is key, and there's a need for us to emphasize that on a national discussion at the national level when it comes to the national statistical system. Thank you very much, and great for your attention.
Thank you very much. I think we should go to the next speaker. Let me bring that information up and change the slides. So our next speaker is Ilgi Bozag, who's coming to us from the UNHCR and who will be talking about the challenges that she faces in her work as a statistics and data analyst working with the global survey team there. So let me go get your slides.
Hi, I hope you can hear me well. I think it's okay. And I can see my presentation on the screen. So thank you, Silan. So I'll talk about a little bit. I like the transition from the last presentation because we just talk about CATI sampling frames. So I will kind of deep dive into that subject, more focusing on the forcibly displaced populations. So this is a study that we realized with my colleague Hunju, she's also in the presentation, in Mozambique about the phone surveys that was done for results monitoring survey. And we will try to show you what it worked, what it didn't, and how it can be done better if we will continue to do phone surveys. Next slide, please. So just to give the numbers, so forced displacement, hard to reach, of course, it's highly connected. And then if we are talking about the forcibly displaced and stateless populations, this is almost reaching 108 million by the end of 2022. And knowing that only 22% of these refugees are, I mean, there are also other populations, but are living in the camps, which is already make it hard to reach because then they're kind of dispersed within the cities and different parts of the country. And 60% of the IDPs, internal displaced populations, and 80% of the refugees are estimated to live in urban areas. So as a result of that, as we are going through the hard-to-reach population, that kind of explains why we need more technical and methodological developments and innovative methodologies to improve when we are doing surveys with this kind of populations, and why we call them hard-to-reach populations. Next slide, please. So then the solution that came as phone surveys, and I felt like since COVID that became a thing to do, especially with the UN organizations and the World Bank, and we were all kind of going into the phone surveys, and it still continues. I mean, it was already there, but now it's more and more common. And I'm more talk about the World Bank and WFP, and of course there are so many other phone surveys, but I feel like World Bank and WFP and other few organizations, they do phone surveys with forcibly displaced populations, which is slightly harder to do. as we cannot do this random dialing on other methods that still requires a sampling frame. So there are more limitations, even within the limitations of phone surveys. But then the question we asked was then how we can improve methodological aspects of the phone surveys, as we will possibly continue to do so. Next slide, please. So our aim for this study was to optimize efficiency and accuracy on data collection via telephone, because as I said, this is gonna keep going and we have to think about as survey methodologists how we can improve the way we do it. So in this study, I will talk about different things, but a little bit, because of course we have limited time. But then I will a little bit talk about what's the role of sampling frame, and is there a potential gender bias and how we can overcome when we are doing a phone survey, especially in the areas that we work in. And does the length of the survey have an impact on refusals? I think the refusal rate is quite important within phone surveys, but just to mention that it works quite differently for forcibly displaced populations. And then how many call attempts do we need to implement when we implement our phone surveys? Next slide, please. So then quickly to talk about our case study and also a little bit of Mozambique for those who are not familiar. Of course, it's a very complex situation of forced displacement with 1 million internally displaced due to conflict. This is more in the northern part of Mozambique. And there are also the refugees and asylum seekers. They're dispersed within different parts of the city, but they're mostly around Nampula. It's on the north, and they're around the Maputo and Maputo city. And so the total numbers are in June 2023 was 32,000, and for IDPs it's more than 800,000. And the data collection that took place in Mozambique for results monitoring surveys that now, next slide please, just to quickly mention what it is. Next, I think it's coming slowly, this one. Thank you. So it's a household survey with standard questionnaire. So it's a survey that is done by UNHCR and that aims to collect data on the indicators, but this is more internal indicators for UNHCR, but also for Sustainable Development Goal to facilitate and harmonize monitoring of survey-based impact and outcome level indicators. And this way, we can tell a bigger story on changes in the lives of forcibly displaced and stateless person. And that, of course, provides us evidence-based multi-year strategy programming and advocacy awards. So this is part of the data growing world within the UN and within UNHCR. And now it's becoming more and more important. So now, last year, we collected the data for results monitoring surveys in 33 countries, and this year around 50 countries will do data collection for the same survey, and it has a standard questionnaire. Next slide, please. So the overview of the survey, the RMS that was implemented in Mozambique, it was implemented by a local survey firm that was selected through a procedure based on their qualification. And the data collection took place from February to April 2023. And so this looks a little confusing, but as we were surveying different population groups, for each population group, there was a different modality that was selected and different kind of sampling based on the population that we were surveying. And here, of course, we will more focus on the CATI, but just to show the overview of the survey that was done in Mozambique. So for CATI, it was refugees and asylum seekers as a population group. That's the one that I will more go into detail after this slide. And the sample was stratified by sex, and it was selected through Progress. Progress is the registration tool of UNHCR. So this is kind of UNHCR administrative database in a way. And the sample size was 400. That was the targeted sample size. And the data collection tool was Dublo Survey to Go. And yeah, you can see the population size that has been targeted. And then the same same survey was done also around Nampula city, but in the copy version, and it had a different sampling strategy that was random walk because it was face to face. And for internally displaced persons, it was also a random walk because it was a face-to-face survey. But in this presentation, we are more focusing on the CATI. Next slide, please. So the CATI phone survey in Maputo and surroundings. So as I said, the Progress was the main tool for registration of refugees and affected populations of UNHCR. And for the selection of the sample, we included only those who had their phone numbers registered within the Progress. And so during the data collection, there was a verification exercise, which means those who were already registered within the system, they were being called to verify their phone number and their important information that was registered within Progress. So then you will see why it's important. But then, so in the first batch, there was the main sample selected 240 for females and 364 males. And you can see we had to go for stratification by gender because the number of females with phone numbers was much lower than the numbers of males with the phone numbers. So that with stratification, we thought that at least we could try to reach something a little bit more equal to the reality. And then in the second sample, we drove an even bigger sample. It was 560 for females and 840 for males. So total of 2,000, I think around 100, no, I think it's 2,080 was the total number of people that we tried to reach out for the sample of 400. Next slide, please. And of course, this number is quite big, and this is just to show that the phone surveys, especially when we work with the forcibly displaced populations and where phone numbers are most of the time not registered, the response rates are very low. So as a result, the response rate that we get was 18%. And the contact rate was 30%. So basically, in most cases, the phone numbers were outdated. So that was the main reason of not being able to reach out to respondent. And the refusal rate, where the enumerators were able to contact with the people and they said that, oh, I don't want to do this survey, was very, very low. I think the total number was around 15 who actually break out the survey. And cooperation rate was 61% at minimal and 73% including personal interviews. So this means that those who were able to contact it, they were mostly cooperative, so it was slightly higher. And so maybe just one point that I realized that I didn't talk. So why we did CATI in Maputo and not in other places? Because in Maputo, it's an urban area and refugees are really dispersed within the city. That was the kind of best way to do a survey. It was kind of the only way, so that's why we had to go for CATI. And we kind of took the opportunity to turn this into a study to find out if it works and if it doesn't work and how we can make it better. Next slide, please. So as I talk about the first and the second batch, so this is very, it came to a picture that yes, it matters because as I said, there was a verification exercise. And when the phone numbers were verified, the total number of attempts were much lower. They were able to get much higher response rate. So it increased really drastically. So it showed that if our sampling frame was verified recently, you can actually still get some good results. But if you have outdated phone numbers, so that means if you didn't verify your administrative list, you will not be able to get any good results. So that was one thing that we know, but that was kind of a proof, statistical proof for us to say that yes, having an updated and recently verified sampling frame is crucial. Next slide, please. And so the respondent profile, so as not surprisingly, knowing that the most phone numbers were belonging to males within the sample, and we drove the sample for individuals, we had more males, but still with the stratification, the response rate was still okay for the females, considering the low number of females within the sample. And there are some other information on legal status and marital status that was kind of proving that the sample that we got in the end was kind of similar to the sampling frame that had the phone numbers in it. Next slide, please. So then that's another question that we ask: does the length of survey affect the response rates? So this survey was adapted from CAPI. So as a result, this is a long survey. This is not a regular phone survey that has 20 questions. So it's relatively longer. So the median length of surveys that we calculated was 36 minutes. And I think it's quite a lot to keep people on the phone, and the questions we ask are very socioeconomic questions about disability. It's quite long, and it's not like happy subjects, but still it didn't have any impact on dropouts nor refusals. And the length of the survey was actually heavily differed based on the household size, because in order to get some of the indicators, we still have to ask some questions individual base, which means we have to know the age and sex of each household member. So this is a must for this survey. So as a result, if the household had 10 members, the survey was automatically much longer. Next slide, please. And so how to optimize call attempts as statistical evidence. So that was another question that we asked, because when we were first preparing this, we said that, okay, do a 10 call attempt, you have to call at least 10 times, and you have to do it morning, evening. But then we realized, as the lists were not updated, basically, if they were not able to reach the people up to 4 attempts, then it was almost impossible. So it was not very necessary to keep calling those people who obviously changed their phone numbers because they were not outdated. So this was kind of a learning for us, that not losing time still, I mean, we have to try a few call attempts, but then not losing time trying to call these phone numbers who are off since a long time ago. Next slide, please. And then the last thing that we do was a Kaplan-Meier estimation, a survival analysis for call attempts by batches, because as I said, the second batch had more verified phone numbers, and of course, the results were expected. As you can see, the call attempts in the second slide with the green, it shows the second batch. And there we can see that actually it's much faster to be able to get a contact rate with the phone numbers as they've been verified, whereas in the first batch, it was much more slower. So again, that proves that having a verified and updated phone numbers helps really a lot. Next slide, please. So the final lessons learned from Mozambique, as I said, the updated information can change the response rates drastically. And this is especially for phone surveys, as this is the only way to contact people. Because I feel like when it's face-to-face, and if you are in the neighborhood, there are still ways to be able to get in touch with these people. But with phone surveys, it's impossible. Gender stratification is crucial, but it's not only gender, of course. This is any kind of stratification when we are drawing the sample. But for phone surveys, maybe it matters more, of course, depending on the context, to make sure that we are getting the response from both genders and it's not biased towards one gender. And the length of the survey is not ideal, and it's longer, as I said, but then it did not really have a negative impact on the response rates. It doesn't mean that we have to keep people on the phone around 2 hours, but still, it's good to know that it kind of worked. On average, 4 call attempts was suggested if the phone number is reachable, and I think that's what we will go for the other phone surveys that we will do in the field. And the sample for Kati, that's the last lessons learned, because our challenge, I think it's another subject, was that the CAPI survey was a household survey, and we had to kind of transform it into an individual level survey as Kati. So it was a little bit challenging, but then it requires that we have to draw the sample from individuals, not households, in order to capture less biased information for individual level questions. That's all from my side. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your talk. I will stop sharing and set up for our next talk. Our next talk is going to be from JP Ferreira, and he's going to be talking about some non-probabilistic aspects. So let me just go find those slides and share the screen for that one.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm going to present a case study of a survey using a non-probabilistic sample carried out in Uruguay and some strategies that we can use to make inference. A warning, I'm a random sample guy, so it's like my religion. To arrive at the method used to make this inference using non-probabilistic sample, I'm going to try to make a link between the design-based inference paradigm, which is the gold standard for the production of official statistics, and the problem it has to do to change in the nature of the population we are investigating, as well as the impact on new technology to collect data. You will see many equations in the presentation, but they are not necessary to follow. I'm going to focus on their interpretation, but they are useful for those who want to go deeper. Next slide, please. Generally, estimates using samples are carried out using a system of sample weights. We use a single system of weights to make estimates for everything. This is the approach generally used by National Statistics Office. In the case study that we are going to see later, we want to archive the same. Next slide, please. This approach has many benefits and some restrictions. It's easy to make estimate using standard statistical software like R. Usually the weights are calibrated using population count, generally using demographic data. And regression or calibration estimators are basically the same, but their approach is different. Next slides, please. Thank you. The design base is the predominant approach in the National Statistics Office to make inference. In this approach, the only source of randomness that allows us to make inference comes from the sampling design, but it's at risk due to the reduction in response rate and coverage problem in the sample frame. Next slide, please. So the objective is always to obtain good estimate, for example, of the total of the variable y. To do this, we select a random sample where we assume that all units, households, for example, have a probability greater than 0 of being selected in the sample. Also, we assume that all individuals respond. Next slide, please. The simple way to weight our data to obtain a biased estimate is to use the Hurwitz-Thompson estimator. Each unit is weighted by the inverse of its selection probability. This estimator has beautiful theoretical properties. It is unbiased, and its variance will depend on the sampling design used. Next slide, please. One way to make more accurate estimate than the Hurwitz-Thompson estimator is to use auxiliary information in the estimation process through a model. The idea is to find a model to estimate the target variable. The model is estimated using the random sample, and the role of the model is to assist the estimator, so the second term of the equation protects the estimator if the model chosen is not true. For example, underestimate the target variable. There is a wide range of models or methods to choose from. The most traditional is to use a linear regression model, but other non-parametric or machine learning models can be used, for example, regression tree. For many models, the estimator is approximately unbiased, but the precision depends on the predictive power of the model. If the variable, next slide, please. This. Thank you. If the variable used to build the model are correlated with the target variable, the estimator will have a lower variance compared to the Horvitz-Thompson estimator. Next slide, please. If the method is a linear regression model, we obtain the regression or calibration estimator, also called Gregg estimator. In this case, the auxiliary information used to build the model is estimated without error by the new adjusted weight. This estimator is widely used by statistical office. The Gregg estimator has the advantage that for its construction, it is necessary to have only auxiliary information available for the sample and the total or population count. When the X variable is a categorical, the Gregg is equal to the well-known post-stratified estimator. Next slide, please. When we weight our sample data using post-stratification, we construct the post-strata or cell in such a way that the unit cells are homogeneous with respect to the target variables. This is done when we use a regression tree to assist the predict estimator or the regression estimator. Next slide, please. Oh, no, sorry. Okay, sorry. If the model used to assist the estimator is a regression tree, the cells or post strata are constructed automatically based on the sample data. This type of estimator is usually useful when the number of auxiliary variables or their number of categories is large, which allows found complex interaction between the variables. I emphasize this estimator because we are going to use it later when weighting our non-probabilistic sample. Next slide, please. Under the design-based approach, we pay attention only in the variance of the estimator because they are unbiased under perfect condition. But in reality, these estimators present problems due to problems in the coverage of the sampling frame and the existence of selected units in the random sample that do not respond. Next slide, please. So these problems introduce bias in our estimate, and what we do in practice, although we do not admit in our subconscious, is that we have to assume models that may or may not be true. This is not far from the approach used to make inference using non-probabilistic samples. We basically assume that the non-response mechanism and the model used to predict the target variable can be constructed using the auxiliary information that we have available. The model used to estimate the probability to respond usually is very naive. For example, we create classes or post strata in our sample, and we assume that all units in the cell has the same probability to respond our survey. The mixed and random assumptions say that the probability to respond depend on X variables and not on the target variable. Next slide, please. When we think about the non-probabilistic sample, we imagine a group of people who are very bored and like to answer random questions. But it's possible to make inference with these samples. But we need two things. One, have a lot of information about the population, and two, assume things, for example, models. Next slide, please. Yes. So the first approach that we can use to make inference is quasi-randomization. The idea here is model the probability of appearing in the non-probability sample called B. To carry out this, we need auxiliary information for sample and non-sample cases to estimate a model under missing a random assumption. To do this, we need information for all the population, which is very restrictive, or we can use a reference sample called A, which is a probability sample. And if this assumption about the probability of appearing the sample B is true, we can make a biased estimate using the Horvitz-Thompson estimator. Next slide, please. The other approach is use a superpopulation model. The idea is to use the sample B to estimate a model and then predict all the things that we didn't see. The strong assumption here is that the model holds for the whole population. Depending on the type of the model, we may need information at micro level for all individuals in the population. This is very restrictive in practice. Other alternative is use the reference sample to make the prediction for the whole population. Next slide, please. So the doubly robust estimator uses the two approach seen before. This estimator looks like a Greg estimator. If the superpopulation model chosen is true and or the model assumed to estimate the probability of participation is true, the estimator will be unbiased. Obviously, this is impossible to know in practice. Next slide, please. So we have different strategies in order to construct the estimator. This includes the method to estimate the probability of participation, as well as the choice of the model to make prediction for the target variable. The choice of the method will depend on the type of information available. We are going to focus on the regression tree model to make prediction on the target variable y. Next slide, please. So if the model used to make prediction about the target variable is a random tree, the doubly robust estimator can be expressed like a post-certification estimator. The final weights are constructed multiplying the inverse of the propensity estimate by the ratio between the estimate of the population box size using the reference sample A and the reference sample B. Next slide, please. So we made an application of the double robust estimator using a non-probabilistic sample for a survey of immigration in Uruguay. The sampling method used was random digital dialing to mobile phones, and no quota sampling was used. The theoretical sample size was 30,000 and the response rate was 3.5%. So we have a non-probabilistic sample or volunteer sample. The key question on the survey was, it is favored that immigrants come to live in Uruguay, where the target variable y is equal to 1 if the person agrees, and is equal to 0 if it's not. The parameter of interest is the proportion of people who support immigration in Uruguay. Next slide, please. To construct the GR estimator, we use the continuous household survey carried out by the National Statistics Institute of Uruguay. This sample A is a nice probability sample of size 19,000 people. Then we put together the probability sample A and the non-probability sample B. To estimate the propensity, we use the age, gender, and education as the co-variables. Then we use a logic model to make the prediction about the probability of appearing in the non-probability sample. Next slide, please. Then we use a regression tree to make estimate of y for the non-sample unit, also using the reference sample. We use, in this case, age, gender, race, education, and region as co-variables for constructing the regression tree. For the regression tree, the minimum sample size in the terminal node or box or post strata was 10. Next slide, please. Yeah, so in this picture, we can see that age, education, and race explain the target variable. Next slide, please. Finally, we compute the final weight for the non-probabilistic sample in the way we saw previously. This weight do not depend strictly on the model variable y. This is not the optimal solution, but the rest of the survey estimate can be done straightforward using these weights. Next slide, please. Here we can see the distribution of the final weights. As we could expect, the form of the distribution does not show a well-shaped bell. This is because we possibly have an underrepresentation of some subpopulation, and on the other hand, we have an overrepresentation of other subpopulation. This is a very common scenario when we are working with non-probabilistic samples. Next slide, please. So here we compare the point estimate using the sample data without weighting. Then the data weighted only with the propensity estimate, and the data using the weight of the double robust estimator. As you can see, the point estimate are basically the same for the propensity estimate and the double robust estimator, but they are quite different if we do not weight our data. So next slide, please. So finally, I think in the production of statistics, official statistics, we need to continue performing probabilistic sample A to produce key indicator estimates, such as unemployment rate, poverty, income, and other subjects. Non-probability samples are a source to obtain economic estimates, and inference can be made using the reference sample A. The last is we must be honest in when we do inference using non-probabilistic sample. So we have to indicate the model that we are assuming to make inference with non-probabilistic sample may be incorrect. And finally, we must leave fear behind and start to use this non-probability sample, but this fear we must leave behind, but not that much. Thank you. This is yeah.
So thank you very much, and thank you to all of the speakers, both in the session today and over the last 2 days. We've got minutes for questions, and I see that there's a first one that had been put in the chat that's aimed at all of the speakers. So let's go to that first question as well. The chat has been very active, and so if I miss something, please don't hesitate to raise your hand and ask your questions as well. So as a first question, where am I here? Do you have technical advice or documents talking about how to reach nomadic populations for national household surveys where we don't have a register, for instance?
Yeah, well, I tried to answer a little bit that question on the chat, and I think that when it comes to this type of populations, when there's no information about the sample size, about the population size, and so on and so forth, I think that in those cases, response-driven sampling can be very helpful if they are used along with new data collection tools, like with WhatsApp, with internet, in such a way that they can adapt to the population that we are targeting, in this case, nomadic populations. So I think it's a very worth hint to explore. Yeah, happy to discuss more about it.
Any of the other speakers want to respond to that question as well? Okay. I see that there's a hand raised, or I thought I saw there was a hand raised. Yes, there is. So can I go to Giovanni and go to your question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I have a question, like all the speakers could chime in. So like you guys mentioned in each of your presentations that although like the sampling, the statistics like can be biased at times, like it's the best like a form like to have when measuring like different stuff, whether it's poverty, sexual violence, etc. My question would be like, how is it possible to make it more objective and non-biased, and what are the steps to go about that?
I think if I can give like a very short answer to this, I think that one of the things that is worth to consider is that the methodology needs to be public and transparent, so that when you publish those data, people know that what are the hindrances and that they can incorporate those biases in this analysis. So I think transparency here is like very important. And I think that that will be one of the ways, at least, that we can actually cope with the fact that these methodologies may be not as robust when it comes to the theory.
Maybe I can come in as well. I mean, I think it can be decreased. We can have better methodological surveys, but for me also, I think sometimes it's important to know, even if it's biased towards what? And then just to mention it when we are sharing the results, because sometimes there is no way to avoid that. So at least people will know that, okay, this result's showing that, but this is biased toward that, and it's okay. Because, I mean, at least the populations that we work with, sometimes it's impossible to get a fully representative sample. But then I prefer to have at least knowing that what went wrong, then I'm still happy to share the results, explaining what went wrong. Over.
I can chime in terms of commonality, in terms of that experience. I've spent the last couple of weeks on a crowdsource approach that we had used, documenting what went wrong. And at some point, the things that went wrong, there was no way that we could adjust. There was no way that we could do anything other than document what we did wrong, which can be a little discouraging potentially, but it's an important part of what we have to share. Victor, was there something that you wanted to add on that question?
No, please.
Okay.
Sorry, thanks.
Well, let me go to another question that had been in the chat. Is there a better designed non-probabilistic sample to facilitate calibration, for instance, or to give less biased estimates?
When you use a calibrator estimator or regression estimator, always we make assumption about the no response mechanisms and the problems of coverage in the sample frame. But they are model based. I mean, we strongly believe when we do that the variables that we use to make the calibration explain the no response and explain the coverage problem in the sample frame. But we never know if those assumptions are true. I mean, we have to live with that. I think it's very honest to put that in our methodologies for the people in order to be transparent where the thing that we're going.
I can maybe add a comment to that question as well. I think what might be more important to the design is not necessarily the type of model that we have behind to try to do the corrections, but the variables that we put in them. And unfortunately, that's quite a challenge. So there are some common variables that are maybe easier to ask that we see commonly: education, sex, age. These are relatively easy to ask. But I've also seen on some surveys where we've got a lot of non-response on our web panels, for instance, that someone's occupation, so which industry they work in, had an impact, a considerable impact on participation, and asking for experiences through the COVID-19 pandemic could lead to differences in our final estimates. So for instance, public servants were answering questions at a higher rate than people working in the construction industry. And they had different experiences in terms of what we were trying to ask for. But those variables are hard to get to because they involve coding, and in the context of a non-probabilistic survey, if you don't have the resources to use a probabilistic approach, you might not have the resources to do the processing next associated to it. Which brings us back, I think, to being very transparent about what we see. Other comments on that front? Okay. Then there's another question asking about how quality compares between phone surveys compared to face-to-face questions. I think one of the responses that has already come in talks about sensitive type of information and how in some situations people can be more comfortable in a phone survey than a face-to-face situation as well. So it might not be one direction. Are there other comments to be added? Victor? Oh, you're on mute, Victor. We can't hear you.
From my experience with the CATI, the use of the telephone survey, mostly they are comfortable because one, there's a message that was sent 2 weeks before the time, and it was not once, twice with a contact person. So we did one where we targeted about 10,000 respondents, and we put in numbers for them to confirm, because in a country where sometimes you have scammers using telephone numbers to try to scam people. So here we send messages to them. They feel more comfortable getting back. And so when interviewers, before they start the interview with them, they confirm whether you have received a message. And I happen to have my name in the message sent to the respondent, and I had a lot of calls from this potential respondent confirming whether truly is statistical service that is doing that. And it helped us to get a response rate hitting about 80%, which is high compared to some of the household surveys that we have done at the national level. So depending on the approach and the mechanisms that you put in place and that confidentiality clauses that we put in there, it really helps. Because one, you are not coming to them and they can reschedule the time that they'll be comfortable to respond to your questions. But for the face-to-face, sometimes thinking that you are coming to spy around their household and going to alert people to come and attack them, but so comparing this to, I think, with my experience, we did wave 1 in March 2020 during the COVID period, and then recently wave 5, and I think it has really helped. And the response rate is always high. Thank you, and over.
I think, Birgit, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so we were actually asking the same question, if there are differences, but I think maybe, again, from our perspective, it's maybe slightly a different point, but I feel like the phone ownership is a big bias itself, and with the populations that we work with, I think mostly then we end up surveying those populations who are better off. And even though maybe data quality is good data, it's not in the end what we want to see with the phone surveys. So it's more not about the quality, but I think it's the concept itself might have an impact on the responses we get.
I think we have time, maybe. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to conclude in that point, like for the RDA survey that we were doing in ET, actually, there was like a quantitative part and a qualitative part. And we tried to do both online, like in a call by WhatsApp and in person. And that what we saw is that people were more prone to share about their personal experience, when they knew the person and when there was like a contact person, like a contact with that person. Also, one of the constraints or limitations with phone surveys is that after a certain amount of minutes, then people they just want to end up the call and then they just don't want to keep like a survey. We found out that actually, if the survey lasts more than 40 minutes, then about like 30% of the people responded. And then when you drop the amount of minutes to 20 minutes, then the rate of response like a drop increase to 90 or 100%. So that's also something to consider, that when one does like phone surveys, they need to actually keep short, otherwise, yeah, the rate of response will be very, very low.
I think I'm going to ask one last question that we've got time for. We have someone, Boniface has been asking about payments to respondents and how that fits into the situation, whether that ends up biasing more. And so I was wondering if there were comments about payments. Yes, Victor.
Thank you very much. I raised my hand because I saw my good friend Roland making a comment. So I think I fully support him. We did the CATI not because we want to replace it with the face-to-face, but it's a way that in case there's a emergency pandemic like COVID, that we can move to individuals in their households. There's always a way to conduct a survey to ensure that it's more of a support where there's a vacuum or a gap. So CATI or CAWE can help to support when there's a tragedy or pandemic, when it's impossible for us to do face-to-face. Thank you, and over.
Any comments on the use of payments? It's not something that I've got experience with. In particular, we tend to avoid them considerably.
Definitely. Well, for the case of response-driven sampling surveys, again, how they are framed, actually, the way you encourage participation is also offering like a bonus for the people when that person recommends someone else, and also a bonus for every single person that is recommended and who answered to the survey. For that specific case, the fact that you do not, or the fact of not using incentives of payments at all, influences the response rate a lot. Like, I mean, the survey that I can say like completely 100% that the survey that we did in IT without the incentives, it wouldn't have been possible. And when you think about it, it makes sense because, like, I mean, you are using people's time that has like a value in it. So I think it also is an opportunity to question ourselves, like to what extent like a survey, which is supposed to be like a public good, can also be like a cost or represent a cost for the people who is answering to the surveys.
I see that I've got some hands raised. I've got Brian who has his hand raised as well.
Hi, yeah, on the question of payments, we did a phone survey in Afghanistan, and one of the things that mattered was telling people in the beginning that there was going to be a payment for completing the survey. Now, whether we got biased from it, we were already getting way more males. We had to screen in order to get enough females. We just asked a screening question up front about the gender. So, but in order to increase responses, people had to know that they were going to get a payment for it.
Boniface, did you want to add to your question or to the discussion on this point?
No, I just wanted to share the experience because we had hired a consultant, and then the list of participants were available. So after randomly selecting the participants, we realized they were really coming from a very dispersed area. So we ended up clustering them so that instead of the consultant or the respondent, I mean the researchers traveling to different locations, would rather bring the sample respondent into a central location, then we would interview them. So in that process, we realized they were going to incur cost to travel to the central point for the interviews. So now when we decided to facilitate them for the transport, we realized, first of all, if the sample person is not available, then the people stand by, they will be like, okay, let's not miss this opportunity. They would immediately start to impersonate, recommending another person claiming to be the sampled person. Yeah, and then also sometimes when you're now interviewing them, they get to start asking the question, am I giving something worth what I'm being paid for? So sometimes it gets to affect the quality of what the information that they give. So I thought I share the experience and also ask in case there was any other experience. Thank you.
I'm going to wrap up this session to leave enough time for the last discussion that Hao Yi is going to walk us through. But let me take the time to thank all of the speakers very wholeheartedly. We really appreciate all of your contributions.
Thank you, Silan. Thank you. First of all, thanks everyone. Thank you so much for all the speakers, the audience who have been part of the speakers and communicate in the chats and raising questions. Thanks to all the advisory group members. Thank you so much for putting the work program together. It has been so great, and I've never felt in any of the meetings I've joined or organized, we have so much time really to exchange and asking questions, and I felt really, really great that we have the space for that. So moving forward, I did receive a question on the revision of the handbook, so I will just, everything's on set, and we will need to have the guidance from our communities, which is the National Statistical Office. So just a little bit of, I guess, preliminary information. We will have draft outline, hopefully by Statistical Commission next year in March 2024, just to get us into a direction and draft outline of the handbook. So I was just going back to, I was talking, refer to slightly a bit of our work, forthcoming work on revising the UN United Nations Handbook on Household Surveys, it was a series of handbooks that were put together between in the 1980s, 1990s. There are a couple in the 2000s as well. So we're trying to see what we can do. How can we update the handbook? So a draft outline and more milestones and timelines to be submitted to the Statistical Commission with all national statistical offices in March 2024. And then we do foresee having experts on board, and we do foresee that we want the handbooks to be practical, not textbook or theories only. There will be theories, but also practical considerations. What do we do when there are so many challenges? The 2026, let me look at my email, what I have summarized. So yes, March 2024, the annotated outline and conclusions of the technical meeting. We will be organizing a technical meeting on the revision of the handbook early next year in January. And then March 2026, so we hope to submit a draft handbook to the UN Statistical Commission. So we will have 2 years time to work on the core product, and we do understand that it's not possible to have a very comprehensive update of everything we've done in the past in these 2 years, given the time limitation and also resource constraints. We hope to build satellite outputs, maybe living documents that to be updated and by different partners and along the way. So this is about handbook. Now, the sampling and sample frames, this is actually the first time I think we really focus on one specific area, sampling. I would like to hear from you. I mean, as the intersector working group, we are a platform to provide a space for everyone to share experiences, to learn from each other. We also facilitate discussions. And if you have, I do receive questions from countries and asking what to do and whether they can learn from others. And we organize small scale, close technical discussions and to invite countries that had experience in certain areas then to support a country or two just to have further discussions. So that has been done. We organize, of course, webinars, and we also can offer a space to facilitate all these discussions. So we can continue to do so. We can continue to have another follow-up if there's a specific topic on sampling and frames you would like to focus on. We can do another one maybe early next year. But really floor is open for comments, inviting our advisory group members and the speakers and the audience to provide your input on how we should move forward together. Yes. I think yeah, Dana. Yes, please.
Thank you for flagging this and giving the opportunity to give feedback. There's definitely a lot of innovations happening now with, but they're quite different innovations for different regions of the world. So when you were talking about the regional commissions, can you say more about the kind of inputs that they would have? You know, yesterday and today, there was some discussion around a lot of geospatial data really being useful in kind of lower resource settings. Then there's like, you know, all of this really amazing stuff with linking administrative data and a bunch of privacy issues and incomplete data issues and stuff that were raised by Statistics Canada and Austria. So those are very different directions. I'm just curious how you're thinking about organizing and guiding people through all those different options.
Maybe we'll just provide options. I think there's a regional perspective, definitely, and we will engage. We've already started discussion with our regional commissions. We work very closely with ACLAC, and Andres unfortunately couldn't be here this week. And ASCAP started also from the Asia Pacific, and then of course ECE colleagues. And they've been so innovative. I mean, the countries in the region have been doing a lot of work on innovations. Yeah, I think it's maybe providing all these options, what's available. And I do feel from our exchange with the countries that thinking big in the way that everyone wants to see what others have been doing. Maybe they will not get there to have an integrated frame from all possible data sources, but that could be something that they start thinking about, given that many countries started to go for register-based census, for example. So they are starting to use more administrative data sources. No, not very clear. I mean, that's why we need the experts on board. Open for suggestions.
I'll just volunteer if you have any technical teams. Like, I think there's probably going to be some kind of matrix between kind of regions and technical or methods. I'm not sure if that's a reasonable way to organize it, but there's definitely kind of some cross-cutting methodologies that apply to several regions. I mean, in concept, all sampling techniques can apply globally, right? But there's going to be some that are more relevant to some regions, and there'll be methods that are cross-cutting. So if you end up approaching it through a kind of matrix approach, I'm very happy to be a part of a technical theme.
Thank you, Dana. volunteers. If anyone else would like to volunteer. Any other input, comments? Dale, yes, thank you. I'm waiting to see which is your favorite, what are the favorite chapters you mentioned yesterday? Thank you. That means there are a lot. Any other comments and questions? What I could do is I could do a small survey. I know nobody likes to complete survey, but really quick, like a couple of questions, and ask what would be the next steps that we can work together, and how for in terms of sampling, and what you think is helpful for us, for our group to work to focus on, to facilitate, to be afraid, to be a platform. Thank you. No more. I've noted down your names. Thank you. So we will make the recording and PowerPoint available online on the website of the Intersector Working Group on Household Surveys. Yes, they will be uploaded online this week. If no further questions, maybe a round of applause to all the speakers, our advisory group members and audience. Thank you so much. Thank you for being with us, for your help. Yes, a round of applause.
Take care. Thanks, Hoi.
Thank you.
Thank you for everything. Thank you for the organization and the discussion.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you very much. Hi.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Is there a hand?
Oh, yes, that's me. Hoi Chen, is it?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you said that like this presentation will be on the UN website, on the website that we used to register for this event.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank
It'll
you.
be on the Intersector Working Group. Yes. Thank you.
Second. Okay.